Please welcome the Honorable Timothy Kaine, United States Senator and former Governor of Virginia, to offer special remarks.
Good morning, friends. Good morning, friends. It is an honor to stand before you on such an important day. I want to thank all assembled, but particularly the Federal 400 Years of African American History Commission. I played a role with Congressman Scott and Senator Warner in passing the federal legislation to recognize this momentous occasion, and I am deeply, deeply moved to be with you today. What does this day mean? In searching for a way to describe its significance, I didn't have the words, but I was drawn to the words of a wonderful Virginian, Oliver White Hill, the pioneering civil rights attorney who I came to know when I was a young civil rights lawyer beginning my career in Richmond 35 years ago. Mr. Hill was born in Richmond in 1907 as Virginia commemorated the 300th anniversary of the arrival of the English settlers at Jamestown. He entered the world into an ironclad, segregated Virginia that had just passed a constitution to guarantee discrimination against all people of color. From the day of his birth, Mr. Hill set his sights on the emancipation of African Americans, indeed all Americans, from the bonds of prejudice. In the military, in the courts, as an elected official, as a very civil rabble-rouser. Mr. Hill helped win the Brown versus Board of Education case, and he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1999. Mr. Hill lived an entire century, and he lived to see a very different Virginia commemorate the 400th anniversary of the Jamestown settlement in 2007. I was governor then, and as governor, I made sure that Mr. Hill got to meet Queen Elizabeth as she and Prince Philip visited the Capitol the week after he turned 100 years old. When Mr. Hill passed away 3 months after that visit, we honored him by having his body lay in state in the governor's mansion. The Commonwealth that was set like a stone against him at his birth accorded him its highest honors at his death. Mr. Hill grappled with the significance of 1619. In fact, he organized a symposium in Jamestown 50 years ago, September 1969, to grapple with what we are grappling with today, the monstrous tragedy of slavery and its deep and lasting consequences. Mr. Hill wrote an autobiography in 2000, and he chose a very unusual title. The autobiography is called The Big Bang. The Big Bang. The book's theme was the evolution of mankind and the need for a continuing American evolution. I can think of no better way to describe the significance of the arrival of the 20-and-odd African slaves at Point Comfort in August 1619. It was the Big Bang. In physics, the Big Bang is posited as the violent event that began the universe, with massive consequences that still linger. It was a starting point, but the process commenced with the Big Bang is not yet complete. The birth of slavery in our nation was equally violent, both at its start and for the next 246 years. And its debilitating consequences linger in our collective soul. It occurred precisely at the same time as the birth of legislative democracy in our nation. So, beginning in 1619, Virginia legislators and judges helped build the legal architecture enshrining slavery on our shore, just as a Virginian proudly proclaimed a society based on the truth that all were created equal. This dualism, high-minded principle and indescribable cruelty, has defined us. And the war between our cardinal equality principle and the prejudices we still cling to continues to define us. We cannot tell the story of our nation without speaking about its indigenous peoples. And we cannot tell the story of our nation without speaking about its immigrant character, as drawn from the experiences of Spanish settlers of 1565, English settlers of 1607, the French settlers of 1608, and the waves of others who freely arrived in their appointed time from all corners of the world. But neither the indigenous nor the immigrant story is the full story of America today. When the first Africans arrived into the English New World in 1619 on these very acres, our nation now contained the powerful combination of indigenous, immigrant, and enslaved. And that mixture became the Big Bang, creating America as we know it today. I want to close with a feeling that I have a very hard time putting into words. The transatlantic slave trade was one of the most cruel atrocities ever perpetrated by humankind. And yet, how fortunate we are as a country that the descendants of that cruel institution, those American slaves and all who followed, are still here and are part of our country. It is impossible to imagine an America without the courage and the spirit and the accomplishment of the African diaspora. America would be so much poorer without our African roots. What does it mean to say that monstrous tragedy in the passage of time may sow the seeds of great beauty? And so we gather here 400 years later in a nation of resilient indigenous people who still face mighty struggles, in a country of immigrants who too often face shouts to go back where they came from, in a land where the historical burden of slavery, racism, and legally mandated discrimination still act as a shackle burdening African Americans. And we're faced with the conflict between our high-minded principles and the realities that we sinful humans often accept or even perpetrate. How might we move forward? Mr. Hill concluded the Big Bang with this quote: "Many of our problems stem from several inadequacies. One is a lack of understanding of evolution and the inevitability of change. Instead of opposing change, we should try to direct the change in a constructive direction. And the second inadequacy he talked about is this. The second is the lack of a model of the type of environment we need for a truly civilized society. As he said, we need to work assiduously to correct this defect. One way to do that is to promote in the 21st century a renaissance in human relationships." And he concluded his autobiography with, "That's where I am now." I hope that's where we are now. It's on each of us to understand our nation's history and, as Mr. Hill said, direct the change toward a better future. We can't do it silently. We can't do it from the sidelines. Let's honor our African roots by finally living up to the ideal, the American ideal, that we're all created equal and that we all deserve to live free. Thank you.